My name is Kathleen Hale, and I'm a professor of political science. I'm also the director of the MPA program, and I also direct the graduate program in election administration, the only one of its kind in the nation. My research focuses on American election systems, how they change and why these changes matter. I'm here to talk to you about what that research shows about making sure your vote counts. So, election 2016 is right around the corner. In order to have your vote count, you first have to make sure that your vote can count. Now, that seems a relatively simple thing to do. In fact, recent research that I've published with Professors Robert Montjoy and Mitchell Brown illustrates the complexity of this seemingly simple task. What I'll do today is talk very briefly about that complexity and then highlight a few areas in which election practices and requirements are important and in some cases very different and how that matters. In order to be counted, your registration and your voted ballot have to travel through an electoral system. However, the idea of a single American election system is actually a misnomer. What we have and what we have had is a collection of 50 systems, different in every state. As the slide indicates, this system is not as simple as putting a slip of paper into one of the old wooden or glass ballot boxes. Generally, the system in each state, as you can see in the before election day column, involves a series of interlocking steps, some of which happen before and after election day, as well as on that day itself. Before election day, your registration qualifications are evaluated by poll officials who are election office staff. These staff are also responsible for making sure that you are assigned to the correct polling location, that you get the correct ballot, that you vote using secure technology, and that you're able to vote privately and independently. During registration, your name and address are entered on the voter rolls. These rolls were once actual paper lists or books, and some states still use these. Today, all states use electronic methods for registration, and some states use electronic poll books at in-person voting locations. Most ballots are still cast on election day, but in some states, you may have the choice of voting by an alternative method known as convenience voting. These include voting in person on the days before election day, voting by mail, or voting by some form of absentee ballot. 2/3 of states allow some sort of early voting, and in Oregon or Washington, voters now cast ballots entirely by mail. Alternative voting increases the likelihood that you will actually vote and may also be particularly effective in increasing turnout among voters with disabilities. Early voting methods are also on the rise. In 2000, 16% of all voters voted early, and that doubled by 2012, when more than 45 million people, or 35% of voters, chose an early option. For 2016, that figure is expected to reach 40%. After ballots are cast, votes are counted. All ballots will be accounted for, but not all cast ballots will count in the vote totals for candidates and issues. What does this mean? Some ballots cannot be counted because of matters of public policy. As examples, some ballots are spoiled. Some ballots are abandoned by voters in the voting booths. Some ballots do not qualify because they were cast in the wrong location or by an unqualified voter. And some ballots that are mailed are simply never returned by the voter. So, what can you do to make sure that your vote is counted? First, you can make sure that you register to vote, unless you live in North Dakota, which has no voter registration. Every other state requires that you first register before election day, and then you also cast a ballot. Most states require that you register before election day, and these deadlines range from 8 to 30 days out. In 13 states and the District of Columbia, you can register and vote on the same day. A couple of states also allow same-day registration, but limit that choice to their periods of early voting and don't allow it on election day. If your name changes or your address changes, you'll be required to provide that information to the voter registration system in your state. And research shows that people who move most frequently are among those voters least likely to vote. Some states have eliminated address-based assigned polling places and instead have established vote centers that can be used by anyone living in a county. Vote centers began in Colorado and are now on the books as an option in about a quarter of the states. In every state, you can also register by when you get a driver's license or when you apply for public services, including services related to a disability. Oregon has taken an entirely new approach by passing a law that automatically registers voters when they apply for a driver's license. Some people face particular challenges in registering. If you live overseas or you're in the military, the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act, or UOCAVA, allows you to register to vote through an electronic system. The service is available through the Department of Defense and is available in every election office around the country to allow military and overseas voters to register and cast their ballots online. Voters with disabilities also face unique challenges. Federal law requires that every voter be able to access all parts of the voting process, including registration, access to polling places and the voting room, and the ability to vote privately and independently. Many states now offer online registration to help with this issue, as well as registration by mail and permanent absentee voting status. At the polls, or when your ballot is cast by mail, you may also have to identify yourself, and especially if you are a first-time voter. Voter ID practices vary widely by state and in two important ways, including whether a picture or photo ID is required, and in terms of what happens to voters when they appear at the polls without the correct identification and attempt to cast a ballot. About half the states require some form of photo ID, although the types of ID that will be accepted are different across the states. At one end of the continuum, a few states impose additional requirements for proof of citizenship, although this has been the subject of legal challenge in the United States for more than a decade. Along the same continuum, states also provide voter identification to voters at no cost. In states that don't require ID, poll workers rely primarily on matching your signature to information on file from when you registered to vote or when you voted last. Voters who do not have the correct ID vote what is known as a provisional ballot. Whether that ballot will count or not depends again on the state. In some states, voters can sign a document at the polls to verify their identity and address. In the most strict cases, voters have to provide the correct ID to the polling location within a specified number of days after Election Day. What this means in a practical sense is that some voters have to make 2 trips to the polls in order to have their vote count. State voter ID methods are changing dramatically with each election cycle, and so it is challenging to generalize the effects on turnout from one jurisdiction or another or around the country. What is clear, however, is that certain groups of potential voters are less likely to have a photo ID or the documents or resources necessary to provide that, including not just money but transportation options. These include the elderly and the disabled, voters in minority and racial and ethnic groups. So knowing and having the right ID for your state is crucial in making sure that your vote counts. I've highlighted today just a very few of the aspects of the American election system that affect whether or not your vote will be counted. And although practices differ around the country, the American election system remains open to all eligible voters. In 52 days, election officials will be counting votes from among the more than 25 million people who are eligible to vote around the country. Votes will come in by U.S. mail, be dropped in drop boxes, be cast on early voting days and on election day in vote centers and in polling places, and be transmitted online from overseas and military voters. In order to make sure that your vote is counted, you can do your part by making sure that your name appears on the voter rolls in your state and in the county where you live, and by being prepared with proper identification. If you're a voter with disabilities or voter in military situation or living overseas, every election office is prepared to help you with special programs that they administer along with the services that they provide to every other potential voter. The way that we register and vote is changing, and changing quickly with technology. Online systems that are used by military and overseas voters are helping us understand the limits of electronic election security, very much in the news. Tablets and smartphones are improving registration and voter check-in practices. Human-centered computing has made its way into the design of new voting systems in large election jurisdictions like LA County with more than 4.5 million registered voters, excuse me. Research about these changes is highly applied and involves extensive connections with the election administration community. I am fortunate here at Auburn University to be able to engage in unique and long-standing partnerships with the Election Center, which works to professionalize election practices around the country. Through a continuing conversation as researchers and as practicing election officials, we learn more about what can be done to improve election systems so that every vote that you cast can be counted as a cast ballot, no matter who wins. Thank you for your time.